But above all, I would say that the way that we can move beyond what Stuart and Rivette have done, which is a great gift to us, is to consider more the context of the city and to consider more the history of religion and why, particularly, the religious buildings that they record were built. Because it's that context and that aspect of history that needs to be brought into the discussion. It's all well and good to record the actual facts of the building, but what we really need is the ancient context for it. And so what we need to do is to bring together the study of ancient religion and the study of ancient architecture to see how the two merge together in a way that I think has not yet been done, but that's a way that I hope that some of you at least will take on for the future, because that's the way that we can move forward beyond the recording of the books and the recording of the buildings themselves. In this particular view, we're also reminded of the current conditions here of the city spreading out into the hills. And it makes me wonder if maybe 200 years from now, somebody will be commenting on this particular view as well. Thank you. Anybody has a question? I'll be happy to answer. Any questions? Yes?
I think there's another Lysistrata's monument in New York, down by Fulton Fish Market.
Oh, really?
On the top of the skyscraper.
That wouldn't surprise me. Also, there are Lysistrata's monuments commemorating Civil War veterans in Connecticut. And if you go into cemeteries, actually all across America, you can find many other Lysistrata's monuments. They're all over the place. Another interesting thing that you can find are obelisks, because obelisks came to have a kind of a symbolic power as well. And it was Stuart who actually was the one who drew the rediscovery of Augustus obelisk in Rome. That was one of his early projects. So yes, Egyptian obelisks in a shrunk form and built up out of stones, Lysistrata's monuments, and not so many towers of the winds, but Lysistrata's monuments in particular seem to have been really, really popular. Actually, they were criticized for including such things as the Tower of the Winds and the Lysistrata's monuments in Volume 1. People wanted the Parthenon, and Winckelmann in particular complained that why are we getting these Hellenistic and Roman monuments? But you see, they were showing that they themselves were interested in all of this. It didn't have to be 5th century for it to interest them. Any other comments? Yes?
Quick question. So what guides did they have? Did they have Pausanias, for example, when they took their trip, or did they?
They did have Pausanias. They had Vitruvius above all, and they do make a fair number of references to ancient authors. They were pretty well read. But essentially, they were more interested in what was actually there. They were not necessarily trying to interpret the texts in the way that we would today. They did make a few mistakes. For example, thinking that the Odeon was the theater of Dionysus, and they thought the Pnyx was the Odeon of Herodes Atticus. So they draw both buildings, but they get the identification mixed up. I would say that in working with their measurements, and also some of their successors like John Gandy at Ramnews, that overall they're extremely, whenever I work on a monument where I know there is the earlier record, I make it a practice of taking my own measurements first and then looking to see what they do. That's true for the Hephaestion as well. They're very accurate. It's true that they did not take into account the variations of changes of temperature in their ruler, which Penrose did, which is why Penrose measurements of the Parthenon are considered the best. But other than that, they are remarkably accurate for what they did. But they were really pioneers in taking a text and using it in exegesis of a monument. So they did pretty well. They had Pausanias, they had Vitruvius, but that wasn't really, and they do a little bit of that, but that wasn't really the main point of what they were trying to do. Actually, there is preserved a manifesto for the Society Society of Dilettanti, saying that one of the objectives of funding all of this was that they wanted exemplars for practicing architects. So we need to keep in mind that the motives of Stewart and Rivette, and even some of their successors, were not just archaeological. They were interested, yes, but they also wanted something that their friends back home could use to build new buildings. And so that practical aspect, I would say, is completely gone now, for the most part, but loomed large for them at the time. And so, therefore, the exegesis based on text was there to show that they knew what they were talking about, but it wasn't fully utilized as a technique of interpretation. Yes?
You spoke about the influence they had on the neoclassical movement, Britain and America particularly. I was wondering, is there any evidence for sort of direct influence of their work on the rise of the neo-Hellenism in Greece in the national identity?
There is, but it comes at a later point. It would be in the 19th century, particularly after the Greek War of Independence and the establishment of the capital. We, for example, have drawings of Schinkel presenting the idea of a palace on the Acropolis. Maybe you've seen this in books. And Schinkel himself was very, very influenced by Stewart and Rivette and by the other buildings too. But he was building up something more fanciful for the top of the Acropolis. And then, for example, even if you just look at the buildings on Panepistimiou, you can see that they are very much in the neoclassical style, but they belong to a later phase of it, later on in the 19th century. So you could say the influence is there, but it was indirect, and it took a while for it to manifest itself. One thing that you can regard as either fortunate or unfortunate, there are arguments on both sides, is that the excavations that were done by German archaeologists, particularly Schaubert and Hansen and Ross on the Acropolis in the 1830s and 40s, were done with a mind to establishing the Acropolis as a 5th century BC monument, and thereby doing away with all of the other buildings that had accumulated in that time. And I suppose you could say that that mentality of that particular period was in some way influenced by the neoclassical movement of going back to this pristine idea of the 5th century or of classical Greece, because they did not want to see Byzantine monuments. They certainly didn't want to see Ottoman monuments, but they wanted everything to look the way it was when Pericles was walking there. And you can be either happy or sad that that's there today. But that is an important point, that we see in Greece itself a continuation of this, so that here it's never a surprise. You don't even have to call it a revival. It's neoclassicism, it's not necessarily a revival. Good, well, thanks.
May I express our appreciation for this great lecture you gave us today, and present you with